Hello, everybody. Welcome to another Transport Evolved live stream. I'm Nikki Gordon-Bloomfield.
And I'm Winter Tashlin.
And we are having a very special live stream today to celebrate National Drive Electric Week. It has been an event that's been going on for as long as I've been in the world of cleaner, greener, safer and smarter vehicles. And not that I want to toot my own horn, that's been quite a while. In fact, Plug-in America has existed ever since the days of the EV1, the original OG GM EV1. And we've got a wonderful guest today to talk about Plug-in America, to talk about electric vehicle advocacy, to talk about how we can get more people plugging in, help transition America's fleet, but in fact, the whole of North America, the whole of the world's fleet away from fossil fuel vehicles and onto electric vehicles. If you want to join in, don't forget, if you're watching live, there are a couple of options here that we can use to interact, and I'm going to demonstrate one of them right now. We have a chat, as you'll see here, electric vehicle head. Hi, Nikki. Hello, everyone. Very wonderful message there. Hello, Nikki, and hello, everyone. I think that covers everything. If you want to send us a super chat, you can do that as well. Stefan, hello. We've got already people joining from all around the world, but joining us from California is Joel Levin, who is the executive director of Plug-in America. Joel, it's been a while since we last chatted. How are you?
Good morning. I am great. It's an exciting time, so I'm really excited to be with you now. It feels like everything is going on simultaneously right now in the electric vehicle space.
It has been quite a transformative decade, hasn't it? Since you know the birth of the Nissan Leaf a decade ago. Now we're in a very different world to what we were, and it's been 20 years, I believe, this year since Plug-in America really kind of got going. Tell us a little bit about the history of Plug-in America.
Sure. So yeah, Plug-in America has been around for probably about 20 years. And we started out really as a group of very passionate EV activists, people who discovered electric drive back in the late 90s, early 2000s. And with the first generation of EVs that were out there, with the EV1 and the RAV4 and the Ford Ranger and cars like that, and they felt like they had discovered this secret, this new technology that was just so much better than a gas car, and they wanted to share it with the world. They felt like they had this secret, and so they started kind of advocating for it and telling their friends and promoting it with government policymakers and kind of pushing the automakers on it. And then with the whole kind of history of who killed the electric car, they were pretty upset. People had these cars kind of, pulled out of their hands, and so they went on to make a big fuss and to protest and to do street theater and make a big deal. And eventually that group of activists kind of turned into Plug-in America. And we became a nonprofit registered 501c3 in 2008. I'm a relative newcomer to it. I actually joined the organization in 2015. So it's been 6 years now, but it's been going on much longer. And back then, it was like this group of people kind of yelling in the wilderness, and no one really heard them. And even when I started, it still felt like, people thought we were kind of crazy and nobody really knew what this was. And we felt like, again, we had this secret. We knew this thing that no one else knew about. And now you've got the president talking about electric cars, and the president, going to Ford and test driving the new Lightning, and Ford just a couple of days ago announcing that, they're going to build, 3 new facilities and spend $11 billion. And there's just all this remarkable stuff happening again. And we look back where it felt like we were just a handful of people yelling and no one was hearing. And now the world has really shifted so much.
It really has been wonderful to see that transition and to see Plug-in America grow and change. I just want to say happy birthday to Mike. He just said, TE live stream, best birthday present ever. And we've got people tuning in from all around the world, including my home county of Norfolk. Do you keep a trash and board, Dave? I hope that you are well. If you are not Norfolk, then you probably don't understand that. And thank you very much, Henrik, for your kind donation, helping spread the word about cleaner, greener, safer, and smarter vehicles. And as our wonderful Kate Bon Elliott in the chat says, happy birthday, Mike. Glad we could help you celebrate. Electric Vehicle Head has said, Joel, could we talk about Nikki's RAV4 EV? I don't know if my RAV4 EV is necessarily important to this, but the first generation RAV4 EV was one of the vehicles that really helped Plug-in America get started. And of course, the EV won. Both of those vehicles were taken back and crushed by their respective automakers, but some of those RAV4 EVs managed to escape, and I believe that many of your members still care for those today.
Yes, there are a number of those that are still out on the streets. I don't know how many, probably a few hundred, maybe 1,000 or two. Yeah, we have a number of members that are still kind of nurturing them. They have people who still drive them. I think they have a lot of challenges with them. They're the charging ports for them are different than modern charging ports. But there's a number of them still going. They're still pretty solid vehicles. There's been a few generations of RAV4 since then. There was the one that they brought out in 2013 and 14, and now there's the newest one that's been out for maybe 6 months or so. There's been a few different iterations of it.
And obviously, then we got the Tesla Roadster, which I know Winter is a big fan of, the original Tesla Roadster.
I haven't gotten to drive one yet, but I always, when I was more of a petrol head, I lusted after the Lotus Elise. And now that I'm sort of committed to not going back to petrol, I really want to get behind the wheel of a Roadster.
But and then, of course, we've got the Tesla Model S, and then all of the other production electric vehicles that have come on since then. And I think, Joel, it's really important to note that not everybody at Plug-in America drives a super expensive Tesla. There really is a whole breadth of different electric vehicles and electric vehicle experiences represented by your team, actually at Plug-in America, but also by your members. So talk to us about some of the cars that are represented by Plug-in America's members.
Yeah, so our members drive the whole gamut. We certainly have plenty of Tesla heads, but there's people who drive all kinds of other stuff as well. Personally, I have a 2015 Nissan Leaf and a 2012 Volt, and they're both doing fine and great. And I love bringing them to events. We do a lot of EV events, not for the last year and a half, but we're starting to get back into them. And what's fun about having those cars at events is very often people will come up and they look at your cars and it's like, oh, wow, EVs are really great, but they're really cars for rich people. I can never afford one of these. And I'm like, well, I've got my 2015 Leaf here. You could probably go out and buy this for about $6,000, and then you'll never pay for gas again. And my maintenance, I basically have to rotate the tires and put in wiper fluid and the brakes, and that's about it. And they're like, what? Really? So they're great for changing hearts and minds. So I love having older vehicles, and they're both running fine, and we'll probably get quite a few more years out of them.
It's very interesting to note, isn't it, that a lot of people kind of forget that there's more than just one make or model of car on the road. And one of the things I love about Plug-in America is it does represent all EV drivers. Stefan just said, do not forget the Ford Ranger EV. Stefan, no, we won't. We did a feature on that earlier on this year. I don't know if you saw it, but we did a feature on that. And of course, it's the precursor to the Ford Lightning, which I'm sure will come, the Ford F-150 Lightning, which I'm sure we'll come and talk to later on. Good morning to Kia from PDX there. She is another sort of short range, low cost EV driver. She has a Chevy Spark EV, and I think it's a really good jumping point to discuss, Joel, the statistics about most people's needs for EVs and most people's kind of how most people can benefit from EVs. So let's talk a little bit about that and dispel some of those myths, as you said, of, the myth of you have to be, earning 200 grand a year to buy an electric vehicle, or you have to spend $100,000 on an electric vehicle.
Right. So the average American household drives 30 miles a day. That's kind of the statistics, 30, 31, 32. Right now, obviously, it's less. The average household right now probably drives like 0. But and so with an EV, you need a car that meets your needs. And you know, it's funny when you sometimes I have conversations with people and they say, well, I'd like an EV, but I really need a range of 600 miles. And then you say, well, how far does your gas car go? And they're like, well, I don't know, actually. So why do you need a range of 600 miles? They're like, well, you know, for in case I drive to New York. Like, well, how often do you drive to New York? Well, I've never driven to New York, but I might, you know. Um, so what really you need to think about when you buy an EV is what are your needs really, and you want to buy a car that meets those needs. And what's really interesting is a lot of people live in 2-car families, and if you're in a 2-car household, generally one of those cars you use for road trips and one of them you use for around town. And so if you're, you know, you drive 5, 10, 15 miles to work, range doesn't really matter to you. You know, you with very limited range, and it's you're going to be totally happy. It's going to meet your needs, and it's not going to cost very much. So people kind of forget that. In a 2-car family, the whole range thing, a lot of time it just goes off the table. You can get an old Leaf like mine, and you'll be good.
I mean, it sounds like you're describing my family. My husband drives a 2018 Model 3 long range, and that's our road trip car. We drove that across the continental United States. We moved out here, and I drive a 2011 Think City, which has about 70 miles of range left. I bought it for $3,400, and it gets me pretty much everywhere I need to go from my drives. And if we do something big, we have the Tesla.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we couldn't have afforded 2 very expensive EVs, but we could afford to drop, you know, $3,400 on the Think and then have the Tesla, and that suits us really well.
And let's talk let's talk that through with the with more discussion of affordability for EVs and some of the programs that Plug in America has been working on, Joel, to help towards that affordability and infrastructure. Obviously, it doesn't matter if an electric vehicle, if it's possible to buy an electric vehicle for $5,000, $6,000, $7,000. It's not right now because the used car prices of electric vehicles have soared sky high because of the microprocessor shortage. But if you look back sort of a year ago, it was easy to pick up a Spark for $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 in certain parts of the US. And while people can pick up an electric vehicle very cheaply, one of the challenges, especially if you're living in a densely populated urban area, is the matter of charging deserts. And one of the things that Plug in America really works hard on is kind of behind the scenes advocating for the needs of electric vehicle drivers, and also working to encourage sensible charging infrastructure. So perhaps you could talk a little bit about your work in that area.
Yeah. So I imagine at some point we'll get into talking about the federal budget reconciliation bill that
absolutely.
is working its way through Congress right now. But we've been really active in talking with members of Congress about making sure that bill includes funding for charging deserts, for rural areas, for lower income areas, because that's really a big issue. If you know, here where I live in Los Angeles, if you go onto like PlugShare and you look at where the charging is, you'll see that there's parts of the city where, you know, charging's pretty good, and then there's big areas of LA and East LA and South LA where there's not much, where it's a lot more sparse, and that's because, you know, a lot of charging has been put in by you know, private charging networks that need to recoup their investment, and so naturally they tend to put it in the places where there's the most cars now, and then there's the most people who can afford to buy charging now. But if you look out 5 or 10 years and you want to make sure that EVs are available to everybody, you need to really go beyond that, and that requires government investment, utility investment. So like City of LA here and LA Department of Water and Power are doing a lot of investments in kind of more moderate income areas where there's not a lot of cars now, but we expect there will be. And so it's kind of a chicken and egg challenge.
obviously the charging infrastructure issues that currently exist are more than just where the charging stations go. It's often interoperability and ease of use. Those of us who've been driving electric for the last decade or more, remember the days when we used to have to carry around a massive wallet with 7 different RFID cards in just to get across a major city. That's become a lot less of a problem for EV owners today, thanks to interoperability agreements and thanks to collaborative projects. We've seen it here in the Portland area. I know you've seen it down in LA as well, where charging networks have started to work together to agree on roaming agreements. And then you get to a point where even, some charging networks, Volta comes to mind, where you don't even have to pay for charging because the charging station is a giant billboard. And so they make their money as a company from charging people, companies to advertise on the billboard. And then you get free electricity as a side effect of that particular thing. Let's also not forget the excellent work of Kitty Adams and Adopt a Charger. I know that Kitty has worked very closely with Plug in America in the past. The concept of people being able to adopt a charger and make sure that that charger stays active, make sure that that charger stays functional, make sure that it's looked after. Little projects like that, grassroots projects like that really have made a big difference. But let's turn our attention to something that I know Winter and I have talked about. In fact, Winter, we were talking about it while we were on our trip this week, and that is the government plans for electric vehicles. Now, President Biden has really pushed a very hard call to electrify the federal fleet, to reach a number of electric vehicle milestones over the next 10, 20 years. But we've not yet reached a commitment to ban the sale of new internal combustion engine vehicles nationally. Although, of course, Governor Newsom has signed a bill in the state of California, and I expect several other states will be following suit. Probably the whole of the West Coast and the whole of the East Coast, maybe not Florida. That's pretty much how we see it happen. Joel,
the Carolinas are going to be a tough sell too, Nikki.
Yeah, they are probably. Yes, you're probably right. Let's talk about the effect that positive policy can have on the EV marketplace.
Sure. Well, so President Biden has proposed a package of $174 billion to support EVs. That's with a B. It's an enormous amount of money, but it's really intended to spark a dramatic shift in this whole piece of the American economy. In transportation, it's a big chunk of the U.S. economy. And in fact, it's a small amount of all the money that needs to be spent. And it's really intended, in most cases, to encourage private investment. So if you think of buying a car, the purchase incentive you get is just a small amount of the actual purchase price. And it's intended to inspire you to go spend your own money to make that investment. The charging infrastructure, it's going to rely on private companies and utilities and cities and states putting in their own money as well. The heavy duty vehicles, they're looking at a 30% purchase incentive. That still means that companies that own fleets are going to be putting in 70%. So while it's a lot of money, it's really intended to spark private investment. And it's transformative. It will completely shift this big piece of the American economy. The analogy that I've made is it's like the moon landing program. In fact, it's about the total cost of what he's proposing is about 60% of what the whole cost of the U.S. moon landing program was in the 60s. But that program, at its peak, it employed 400,000 people. It completely did a big leap forward for technology in the U.S. This would be bigger, I would argue. This is going to eventually employ millions of people. It'll more than pay for itself because of this new technology that we'd be leaping into. So it's certainly well worth it, the investment. But it's really it's transformative. It's not just a few investments here and there. It's shifting this whole piece of the economy.
And do you think that there's a really realistic path forward for that, making it into law?
Well, good question. That's changing minute by minute, literally. So I don't know how closely you're following this, but there's sort of two different pieces of legislation that are kind of working their way through Congress. There's an infrastructure bill that has about 5% of what the president asked for EVs in it. So there's a little bit of EV charging in it. There's EV charging in it, but most of the other stuff was not in there. And then separately, there's a budget reconciliation bill that's much larger that has a pretty big chunk of everything the president asked for. And so the EV stuff is bundled in there with just a number of other programs for infrastructure investment and social programs and things that would really shift. I mean, it's a massive change in the US. If all of this were to go through, it would be something on the lines of like the New Deal program in the 30s. It's a really, really big deal, and it's all bundled together. And whether it goes through, I hope so. But the EV funding is tied in with all this other really big ticket stuff that goes somewhat above my pay grade.
Something I'm curious about that I feel like is very relevant to you to your work is, at the moment it feels like electric vehicles and EV infrastructure is very associated with Democrats and liberal politics in America. Does Plug-in America have any sort of path or ideas around making EVs and electric vehicle charging infrastructure a more bipartisan thing, sort of in the cultural and political landscape?
Well, interesting enough, EVs are not that partisan. There's a lot of Republican support for EVs, and in fact, the original EV tax credit was originally written by Senator Hatch of Utah, who's a Republican. And so what we found is that EVs offer something to everybody, and that I spent a lot of time on Capitol Hill talking to people on both sides of the aisle about EVs, and what you emphasize depends on who you're talking to. So there's some places where you talk about climate change, and that's what really resonates for people. There's other places where it's all about local air quality. So there's plenty of places that are more conservative that have big air quality problems. And the idea of driving around in vehicles with no tailpipe really speaks to people. But then if you go to places that are traditional auto manufacturing states, Michigan, Ohio, Illinois, places like that, it's about, good union jobs and auto manufacturing, and the notion that the whole world is shifting to electric vehicles, and then no one even really questions that anymore. And if we're not part of the train, we're not going to be building cars in 20 years. I mean, that's it's a fact that Germany and China and other countries are investing hundreds of billions of dollars in electric drive technology, and if we're not, we're just going to be buying cars from them. And so that speaks really well there. And then there's other states that are very keen to build out a manufacturing base to get into the kind of high tech industry, and EVs are an opportunity to get those kind of jobs. So if you look at where a lot of the factories for manufacturing are being built right now, it's Georgia, Tennessee, Arizona, Texas. These are pretty conservative states, but they're seeing the jobs and they're really excited by it. And the model you can look at is Northern Nevada, where the Gigafactory is. So Tesla put that factory in there, and it has completely transformed the economy for Northern Nevada. It's explosive. There's just so much work going on there and so much economic development, and other places look at that and they're like, hey, we'd like that, and that's not a big Democratic issue. That's jobs. That speaks to Republicans too.
It's interesting you bring that up, because we just literally yesterday evening got back from Arizona, from Casa Grande, where Lucid has its massive production facility there. And when we were back at the airport, I actually had someone comment on, because I had a Lucid hat on, and someone commented and said, "Oh wow, they're really cool. I like what they're doing," and their kind of motivation for liking the car, other than obviously this is a very cool looking car and I've heard cool things about it, was I know people who are working there who have been able to get a new start with a new career in a new industry that doesn't feel like a dead-end job, that doesn't feel like it's something that they're not kind of making a difference. People who work in these factories genuinely feel that they're playing a part into helping transition the world away from fossil fuels. We've got some questions that I think it would be good to go over here. And we're going to go back a little bit because there were a couple here that really came in. Do you think that charging stations will start investing in EV charging? I mean, Matt, we're already seeing that. But Joel, have you seen a shift in the attitudes of gas stations over the last couple of years? As QA Library has just noted, that BP and Shell have both purchased charging networks. Do we think that there is a transition as they seek to become less of gasoline and diesel companies and start becoming energy companies?
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, and you gave the example that some of the big petroleum companies are already investing in charging networks. I would imagine that and we're seeing here that some of the more marginal gas stations have been shutting down, and that's a trend that's been going on for a long time, even before EVs, that gas stations are kind of consolidating and there's fewer larger gas stations and some of the smaller ones are going away. I would expect that what we'll start to see is kind of what the model that seems to have been developing in Norway for a couple of years now, which is that gas stations become basically fueling stations, and they'll have, typically at a gas station, you have two different islands. There's like a store in the middle where you can go in and you can buy your, Slim Jims and coffee and cigarettes and stuff. And then there's two different islands on opposite sides of the gas station. And in Norway now, the new stations they're building, one of those is electric and one of those is gasoline. And I would expect we're going to start to see that pretty soon in the U.S., particularly in larger stations and at like truck stops and along highways and stuff, where they're dual fuel. And in fact, with gas stations now, they make their money from the store. The selling fuel is a pretty low margin business these days. Yeah. So they make their money getting you into the store. And the idea that instead of spending 5 minutes buying gasoline, you're going to spend 20 or 30 minutes charging up your car, and you're going to go in the store and do some shopping. I think that's pretty exciting to those guys. So I think that's probably going to start to become the model, is they're like multiple fuel, and they emphasize trying to occupy your time for those 20 or 30 minutes while you're kicking around waiting for your car to charge.
We certainly see. Go on. I was going to say, we certainly are starting to see in our area in the Pacific Northwest, we see Tesla Superchargers, because that's the only place I'm rapid charging right now is at Superchargers. We're seeing a lot more Superchargers at petrol stations. My last trip to Seattle, when I stopped to charge, it was at a petrol station. They had a bank of Tesla Superchargers. They had, I think, 2 EA stations, and then they had their petrol island. And it seemed, the Tesla stations were full, and I think everyone who was charging was in the store picking up something. So it certainly seems like a viable way to go.
I'm sure that gas station is thrilled that they've got all those Tesla chargers out there. It's probably been a great revenue source for them.
As Matt says, I think eventually the gas companies will have to make the change or just go broke. There is another charging station, and it's on I-5 between LA and San Francisco, and I can't remember the name of it. It's one of the largest Tesla charging stations on that route, in which the local McDonald's has, even in a COVID pandemic, gone, if you order McDonald's, we'll bring it to your car, or something like. There was some perk.
Yeah, we stopped at a place like that on our cross country drive. There was a McDonald's, and there was a sign at the Tesla Superchargers that said, if you're supercharging, call call the McDonald's and tell us what charging bay you're at, and we'll bring your food out to you.
Yeah, which is just brilliant. And one of the things, Joel, that I know obviously that Plug in America has worked on in the past has helped the state of California and other states around the nation working on legislation to try and make it easier for electric vehicle drivers to use their cars, to make sure that they're not overly taxed, to make sure that they have perks, such as obviously the carpool HOV lane access. And we've got a really interesting question here from Stefan in Europe. He said, will Plug in America work for making an EV, for a marking, of EVs to make it easier to see if the car has the right to charge at a plug-in point, like the Norway system where they use E at the start of the registration and a German system where they end in E. Is that something that Plug in America would support, making it easier? Because obviously we have the issue of people icing where they park in an electric vehicle charging bay. We actually saw a car doing that at Lucid's factory the other day. So, I mean, it shows you just how prevalent it is.
Yeah, icing is a big challenge. Yeah, absolutely. We've supported that. It's really hard to do. So what we would love to see is special license plates, so that on just from glancing at the license plate on the back of a car, it's immediately obvious whether it's an EV or not, and that makes it easier for police to enforce anti-icing rules. And most importantly, I think it turns every EV into a billboard for EVs, because it's really common that you talk to people who say, "Oh, I've never seen an EV. I don't know what they look like." Like, but you live in California, you've never seen an EV. It's just because you don't know what EVs look like, And so if they had dedicated license plates, that would be great. We've worked on that in California. It's been really challenging. I think the only state that has it right now, I think Hawaii does. I've been told. I've never seen them.
Massachusetts does as well. Massachusetts EV plates say EV and then the plate number. They have their own designated plate.
Yeah, no, I think that there's a bunch of reasons why that would be great, to facilitate charging, to sort of promote EV awareness among people. But it's it happens at the state level, so you'd have to have 50 different states take that on. And definitely we support that, but it's been, at least here in California, it's been a heavy lift. We're not there yet.
We are also seeing.
We've lost your voice, Nikki.
That's better. That's weird.
Now I hear you.
Pressed the wrong button. That was totally my fault. We've seen a lot of work from the different car companies to fight legislation requiring either zero emission or tighter fuel economy standards. And the push towards electric vehicles is now being, I would say, supported by some companies, reluctantly followed by others, and still campaigned against by a third group. Now, of course, Toyota sits in that final group. Ford, I think now we can put in that first group. And then there are some other companies in between. How do you think that it's going to be possible to corral the auto industry, who obviously have far deeper pockets than Plug in America, to ensure that they don't get the upper hand in these negotiations and these discussions?
Right. Well, I mean, where the different companies sit depends on where they've placed their bets and where their investments are, And so there are car companies now which have really bet the farm on EVs. They've really made a serious investment, and it's all or nothing. Certainly Tesla's always been like that.
Yeah, of course.
VW, I would say, has been like that for a few years. VW has bet the company on EVs. If EVs fail, Volkswagen's not going to be around.
And I think Ford is in the same position, because it's put the F-Series, it's decided to make its F-Series electric.
Yeah. So
but
I think
it's decided to make an electric F-Series. It's not making its whole F-Series electric, right? I mean, it's not committed.
No,
it's still deep in on gas.
I think
they haven't. They haven't committed to making it all electric. That's right. But I think with their latest investment that they just announced with these new facilities in Kentucky and Tennessee, they're seriously ramping up what was, a relatively small production of the Lightning to be pretty substantial. And so I would say that they're really betting it all now. And GM, I think, has as well. I think GM is I'd like them to go faster, but I think in the long term they seem very, very committed. So there's a certain point where you're all in, which is why those companies have all come out and really supported the federal the purchase tax incentive, because they're like, well, we're going to produce these cars. They're still expensive to make, and so we need this tax credit to equalize the cost of buying them. So yeah, they're very committed. And then there's other companies that have not made those serious bets yet, and they're still hedging.
I mean,
Yes, Toyota is
it
on that
comes
list.
to mind, Mazda this week has been doing some work with journalists showcasing its new electric vehicle, which has a range of 100 miles, Winter, something like that.
Just about, yeah. The MX-30, it has like a 100-mile range.
50 kilowatt DC quick charging, and a price that's comparable to a lot of other electric vehicles that are far more capable on the market today.
You could buy an ID4 pretty much for an MX-30, just about, couldn't you? Something like that.
It kind of screams a little bit of compliance car, and it does make you wonder how long these companies are going to keep going. You mentioned there, Joel, and we'll sort of coming to the end here a little bit, but you mentioned that obviously the tax incentives, and it's quite a complicated proposal that we've got coming through through Congress right now. Of course, disclaimer, bills enter into both houses and they may come out the other end fairly untouched, as long as they get through committee, the various committees they have to go through, and then as long as they get through debate on the floor, and then as long as they get through the various votes, they can be passed into law and signed by the president, as long as the president doesn't veto them. But it's more common, especially with a bill that's talking about electric vehicles and spending money, for those bills to get completely rewritten as they go through the various committees and as they come out the other end. And one of the big sticking points right now, as far as a lot of electric vehicle fans and Tesla are concerned, is the differentiation between unions and non-union shops. The differentiation between electric vehicles being eligible for an incentive based on their sticker price, or being based on where they are made. Do we think that sort of package of incentives kind of starts, I think it's 5,000, and then you add a few more if it was made in the US, and then you add a little bit more if it was made by a union shop, and then you have a little bit more if it was under a certain amount? Do we think that is actually what we're going to see come out the other end? Or do you think that Tesla and other car companies who don't use union production are going to be able to get kind of a bit of a compromise there?
Right. In terms of what's actually going to come out the other end, who knows? I mean, there's an expression. There's two things that you never want to see being made, and one is sausage, and the other one is legislation. And so there's just an enormous amount of kind of horse trading and deal making going on right now, and the president is very, very committed to union labor, to labor standards, and the UAW and the unions have been part of this discussion. And so we're talking about a very substantial amount of money of our national resources. And in order to make it work, you need to have a lot of people at the table. And so there's been compromises that have been under development for many months to kind of bring together all of the different entities that you need to make this work, to bring them all to the table. The unions, the automakers, the dealers, the environmental groups, the consumer groups, the people that represent more kind of equity and lower income groups. And so in order to do something this big, there needs to be kind of a broad consensus. And so we're okay with that. If that's what it takes to get it done, so be it. So, it's not, if an economist were to design this in isolation, it might look differently than it does, but we live in a real world where if you're going to be spending huge amounts of public dollars, you need to have a lot of people at the table who feel good about it.
Right. Where do you think we're going to be in 5 years, in 10 years? And maybe you can give us 2 answers for each. Where do you think we'll be, and where would Plug-in America like us to be in those 5 and 10 years' time?
Uh-huh. So the president has, set a target of having, 50% of new cars be electric by 2030. I think the next step is to commit to 100% of new cars being electric by 2035, which is sort of the international standard in California, and a couple of other states and a lot of other countries have committed to that. I think that's an absolutely achievable goal to get there. So to be 100% electric by 2035 is pretty achievable. I'd like to see the president commit to that. We'll see if he can. Um, I, speaking for Plug in America, if we can go faster than that, I think that's achievable as well. As we've seen with other technological transformations, once they start rolling, things start to move really rapidly. I mean, look at how quickly everybody went to a smartphone. That 1 year Apple had the iPhone out. Within a couple of years, suddenly everybody had smartphones. It moved very quickly once people discovered the value of it. The difference between phones and cars is that people keep cars for a long time. The average car is on the road for 12 years, something like that. So you can't easily just change the whole fleet in a year or two. That's not going to happen. But I, where I think we're going to go is I think that 2035 target is realistic. We'd like to see 2030. So what we've called for is 100% plug-in cars by 2030 in the U.S. So that's kind of our target, and I think that's achievable. But that would take pretty substantial political commitment. But I think you can get there. I mean, one of the interesting things is once it starts rolling, I think it does happen faster than you expect. I mean, look at Norway. I mean, they're at what, 85% new EVs or something like that. I mean, it's pretty remarkable, and they're talking about seeing their last gas cars being sold in a pretty short period of time. The difference between here and Norway is that we drive trucks, and right now there are no electric pickup trucks except for the handful of Rangers that are still out there. But that's going to change. That's going to change really rapidly, within the next couple of months, depending when Rivian actually starts producing their car. And so once that happens, I think you're going to see a remarkable shift here that it's really going to accelerate. So we're really excited. I've heard this analogy that we're at this moment right now with pickup trucks, kind of like we were with cars about 10 years ago. At the moment of like revenge of the electric car, when there's all these people that are rushing to build them and get them to market, and nothing exists right now, but that they're coming, like in a big way.
Do you think, I apologize for the noise in the background, they're leaf blowing, and of course they're petrol leaf blowers. Do you think that in addition to programs and incentives to get new car sales to be EVs, do you foresee something akin to the old Cash for Clunkers program to try to get the other side of that equation rolling, getting old petrol cars and more polluting petrol cars off the roads as new EVs are coming in? Or do you think that it's going to be a more organic transformation of people just giving up their old ICE cars to buy, say, used EVs as there's more used EVs on the market?
Yeah, I think Cash for Clunker programs have a role. They have them in California and a few other states. Because they've discovered that the majority of pollution comes from a relatively small share of the cars, and that it's worth it to just buy those cars from people and scrap them. So like California has a program for lower income people that will buy their old cars and replace them with electric cars. So I don't know that that's going to be the majority of it. There was a proposal to do that at the federal level, but it was so complex that I think they ended up kind of pulling back from doing a federal Cash for Clunkers program. Yeah, I think that'll be part of it, particularly for lower income people who have a tendency to hold on to cars longer and be driving cars that require a ton of maintenance and a ton of fuel, and they're really polluting. And so that could be a piece of it. I think there's a bunch of pieces of this as well. And then the charging infrastructure as well needs to get up to snuff. We've been with charging. our sort of philosophy on this that we've talked about a lot with the people writing the federal legislation is that charging should be at least as consumer friendly as buying gasoline. So if you think of all the ways right now in which charging a car in a public network, if you're not driving a Tesla, is much less convenient than going to a gasoline station. So if you have a credit card in the United States, any major credit card, you can go to any gas station in the country and have 100% confidence that you can buy gasoline, right? 100% confidence. You never have to think about it, right? And you can always see the price of gasoline posted before you buy it, which is not true in the EV world. You don't, with many networks, you have no idea what you're paying for charging until after you've paid for it. And then, you would never go to a gas station and find one pump, right? And it's broken. In the gas station world, there's always multiple pumps. And so if there's a line at one, you can go to the next one. If one's broken, you go to the next one. And so we really want to see that in the EV world, that it's at least as convenient as buying gasoline or more convenient. So once we get to, plug and charge, like with Tesla and a number of other model manufacturers are going there, it's more convenient than buying gas because you don't need a little piece of plastic. You just plug in and the pump recognizes your car.
Yeah, exactly. And I think having used cars with plug and charge, it's such a different experience to just, everything else. Electric vehicle head said, don't forget the Chevy S10 EV, some of those early EVs. And no, we won't. It's a vehicle that actually shares a lot of its internals with the famous EV1. It's a vehicle that shared a lot of its electronics. And I've heard stories of people trying to build effectively homemade versions of the EV1 using S10 EV parts, and potentially that's where the motor in my Honda Insight conversion comes from. It's a GM EV1 motor, but I believe it was the same as what they had in the S10 EV. Now, we are getting to a point now where we're coming to a close, Joel, but I'd like to close out by talking about the success that has been National Drive Electric Week. It started off as National Drive Electric Day, and then probably about 4 or 5 years ago, it migrated into National Drive Electric Week. Tell us about that.
Yes, so Drive Electric Week, which is going on right now, has been this incredible success, and it's really there are hundreds of different organizations and probably a couple of thousand volunteers that make it work. And it's really phenomenal. It's sort of like we're sort of the conductor of the orchestra, but we're not the orchestra. The orchestra is all the city captains who are incredibly passionate and devote so much energy to making it work. You're right. It started out as plug-in day, and then it was a week, and then expanded it to a week with 2 weekends. And now we have some events which are even outside of that a little bit by a few days plus or minus. And we had city captains who came to us and said, we want to do events twice a year, or we want to do them other times as well. So we expanded. So we now have Drive Electric Earth Day in the spring. So we have a lot of the same city captains, they'll do an event with Drive Electric Week in the fall, and then Drive Electric Earth Day in April. So it's really morphed, and every year we get more events, and a lot of times we don't even know where they come from. That like someone visits an event and they really like it, and they go back to their hometown and they put one on. And so as you see from the map, they're everywhere. This year we were nervous about how it was going to turn out. We put very strict rules out for COVID safety and social distancing, and that didn't seem to scare people off at all. So we've got, I think, around 235 or so events happening. There might be actually a little bit more than that now, despite COVID and the rules about being safe. So we've been really thrilled with how it's turned out this year. After last year being was much smaller, obviously we were in a different space with COVID than we are now. But yeah, it's miraculous to me that it reflects the passion of so many different people. And we still have lots of events coming up over the next couple of days and this weekend. So would encourage people to go to driveelectricweek.org and check out events near you and go visit some of the events that are going on. One other thing I should mention, if we're coming to the end, is that in terms of the national legislation that we have been active on, that is still very much a work in progress. And we've been, our network people have been sending in thousands of letters and emails and phone calls to Congress, making it clear that when they're deciding what's a priority and what's not with this huge piece of legislation, that EVs need to be part of that. And so if you want to participate, we have a website set up for that. It's realevchange.org, just real, REALEV change.org. And you can go there, and that'll set you up to be able to send there you go, to send an email to your senators and members of Congress to, bang the drum that as they're making hard choices and they have to cut things out, not to cut out the EV support. So thanks for letting me do that little plug.
You're muted, Nikki. Nikki,
And
there you go.
Thank you. Sorry, I just muted it. I don't know if anybody heard it. Totally unrelated to what we were talking about, but we had a coyote come into the garden this morning, and some of our chickens made a lot of noise about it. And I moved the chicken fence and I turned it back on. It's an electric fence, and there was just a god-awful noise coming from outside, and I think a coyote just electrocuted itself on the chicken wire.
So since you're talking about Drive Electric Week, Nikki, my understanding is that you and I are both planning to drop in on one of our local events this weekend, yeah?
Yes, hopefully we'll be dropping in unofficially. In the past, I've gone officially with the channel, and there's one in Tigard, I think, that we're going to,
which is basically where I am, and not that far from you.
Yeah, without giving the game away of where the team live, we're in that neighborhood, a short drive, and hopefully we'll be able to see. I think that it's going to be a fun weekend. I've been going to Drive Electric Weeks for Drive Electric Week for probably about 10 years now, so very exciting. And I wanted to just throw in, obviously it's not just America that is hosting these, to North America that's hosting these. There's also New Zealand, so we've got events in Canada, events in the US, there's an event in Mexico, so that's pretty much a large proportion of North America covered, but then we've also got some in New Zealand, I noticed. So great to see it spread around the world. I know in past years there've been events held in Europe as well. Joel, thank you so much for joining us. I hope that the rest of your National Drive Electric Week goes well. Obviously, people can find out more about Plug in America by going to pluginamerica.org, and do make sure that you go to join up if you want to support the advocacy work and very important work that Plug in America does to try and represent the best interests of electric vehicle drivers, but also people who have yet to make that switch to electric. Thank you very much, Joel, and good luck with all of the work that Plug in America is doing. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. This has really been great fun.
It always is, and as I say, it's just wonderful to have just such a knowledgeable conversation. And I think that some people don't like these long video streams, but I know others of you really do. Winter, why don't you tell everybody what we've been up to this week very quickly without
oh my goodness, this week. So Nikki and I were in Phoenix, Arizona, where we got a very in-depth tour of Lucid Motors battery production facility and vehicle production facility at AMP1. And then Nikki and I each got to drive a Lucid Air sedan and ride in the back of a Lucid Air sedan. We switched off so you could get that passenger and driver experience, and that was very, very exciting. It's a very interesting car. I have a lot of thoughts about it. So yeah, and then Nikki is going to be heading out of town yet again next week.
Yeah, I don't know if I can say where I'm going.
I don't know if you can either, but Nikki's going to be heading out of town to drive another very exciting vehicle. I was just last week in Tennessee driving the VW all-wheel drive ID4, which was very cool.
And I just want to thank you for that, because a lot of people did not realize that you were thrown in at the deep end, as you've just seen. If you haven't watched the Rivian R1T review, which I was doing just before the Volkswagen ID4.
Reviews. You've got your choice. You can watch the short one if you want the overview of Nikki's R1T experience, or you can watch the long one for a much more in-depth dive into Nikki's driving of the R1T.
And we're now going to try and do that with all our videos when we do reviews, because a lot of people think that 30 minutes is too long for a review. So in the future, we're going to try and do 10-minute reviews and then a kind of 40-minute review. We're going to try and do that with Lucid. We had some corporate interviews in there as well. We also talked to our good friend Miriam Joie. So we've got some interviews to come out of that. Obviously, as you may know, we don't have a video editor. It's just me. And so we're raising funds for a video editor. So if you want to support the channel and become a Patreon supporter, you can. And that's a good way of doing it. Thanks to these amazing folks who are scrolling by here on my left, not my right. It's actually my left for once. If it's on the right-hand side, if you're watching it, it's just the way it goes. Be sure to give it a thumbs up, this video, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and our other two channels, which is Transport Evolved Take 2 and Transport Evolved Shorts. Not everyone is subscribed, are they, Winter? But we know that if you do subscribe, it makes things better. Also,
and
hit
the bell. And if you're subscribed and you're not seeing our videos popping up in your feed, consider unsubscribing and then resubscribing and re-hitting the bell, because that seems to somehow appease the YouTube algorithm in much the way that, people used to appreciate the gods for rain. We don't really know how the algorithm works, but it seems to help.
Let us know what you thought in the comments below, and also make sure that you take it over to Discord. Our Discord chat is free to join. It's great fun. And if you want to discuss things in a way that doesn't involve getting angry with someone you've never met, well, then our Discord channel might be a slightly more civilized way of discussing things than the general YouTube comments section. Thanks on behalf of the entire TE crew. These days, that's Winter, myself, Kate Walton Elliott, and Erin, as well as our occasional camera guys. Go out to the folks on our left for being our $15 to $49 a month Patreon supporters. Special thanks to our $50 a month Patreon supporters. They are David Janakula, Andrew Martin, Guido Drahota, Regine Fellows, Brophy Wolf, Tesla in the Gong, Sean Ueda, Gordon C, Anonymous Freak, Jim Burners, Carl Hodgson, Anthony Coates, Ricky Leon, Brian Newton, Laura Sanborn, Rory Litwin, and Denny Hyde. And of course, thank you so much to our top tier $100 a month Patreon supporters: John Lyons, Marcel Ward, Reggie Watts, JP Fagerbeck, Will Graylin, Matthew Drobnak, Christopher Jones, Paul Conway, Ellery Hennesley,
and Ian.
This is becoming a double act that we've started to do fairly regularly. If you'd like to join the ranks, you'll find links below to Patreon, Bitcoin, and Ko-fi. And of course, you can also buy TE swag like this very fine t-shirt that I'm wearing right now. This is the Tesla Evolved t-shirt, but because of licensing issues, we cannot call it Tesla Evolved in our store, because all of the t-shirt manufacturers are so scared of copyright infringement, and names are copyrighted. Brands and names are copyrighted.
And that's not just a Tesla problem either. You'll notice their other shirts have similarly vague names.
But if you peruse the thing, this is actually Erin's art. Erin made this. We're not copying anybody's art. This is completely 100% original. We just can't call it something else. And if you want to know how weird and how stupid the world of online commercial custom media is, this is a phone case that I had made about 5 years ago. It was of a character that I own all of the rights to. It was a case that I paid the artist to produce. The artist told me I could do this. I went to make a replacement one for my new phone, which is arriving next week. And the people producing the phone then said, no, that's cool.
And you should have heard, I was there, you should have heard Nikki's reaction when she got that email. She was very unamused.
And also thanks very much again to the team at Rivian who invited us to do the Rivian R1T review, the team at Volkswagen who invited us to do the Volkswagen review, and of course thanks to Lucid who helped us get to Casa Grande this week. We're not going to get that video out as quickly as everyone else, but I am literally, as soon as I've picked up whatever the FedEx guy is just dropping off, I am literally going to go straight in and start working on that review. Thanks for joining us. And as always,
Keep evolving.
Keep evolving.